It helps investigators see that the plane parts have settled over a 2-kilometer wide area. It's an important piece of evidence.
It was evident that the aircraft had come apart in the air. It hadn't hit the sea in one piece, that was for sure.
The mid-air breakup suggests a bomb brought down the plane. But it will take weeks to prove this. In the meantime, investigators hope the plane's black boxes will provide more immediate insight into the crash. The plane's voice recorder and eventually its data recorder are recovered from the seabed and sent to labs for analysis. Both boxes were damaged in the crash. Investigators hope the damage to the boxes didn't affect the data.
Well, let's see what we got.
The voice recorder may have picked up a conversation between the pilots that can explain what happened on board.
On.
That's required.
Auto feather system.
Armed to 2 green.
The device usually records the final minutes of a flight, but this CVR has done the opposite.
Beta lights off.
Power.
It recorded the start of the flight, but then mysteriously stopped recording just before the plane took off.
Well, it had recorded the conversation on the ground, but as soon as the engines were upshifted to normal RPM for takeoff, it ceased operations. So that was a disappointment to us.
But the malfunctioning CVR did pick up an intriguing exchange between the two pilots.
How's the weather in Hamburg?
It's clear skies, good visibility.
Hope it stays that way.
The CVR does tell investigators that Flight 394 began with an unusual problem.
Partner was in financial dire straits, and we found out that just a few hours before the plane took off, the Norwegian aviation authorities sent out a telex to tell all the airports in Norway to don't let a partner plane take off because they owe a lot of money in non-paid charges and fees.
They won't release us for takeoff until we pay the catering bill.
How much you got on you?
Seriously?
Huh?
Probably enough, actually. I'll take care of it then.
The first officer was forced to leave the cockpit to pay the caterers for onboard meals. Investigators check maintenance records to find out why the CVR only recorded the crew's conversation while they were on the ground. They discover that the plane's cockpit voice recorder had been modified more than 10 years earlier.
Modified to switch to primary AC.
Beta lights up.
It was altered so that when the engines were given full power for takeoff,
Your power.
the CVR would automatically switch from the plane's batteries to its generator.
And that modification was not working on this aircraft.
Neither pilot realized that as the engines were revved up for takeoff, power to the CVR was actually cut off.
Anytime you get key investigation components such as the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder that don't work correctly, it brings into question the thoroughness of the maintenance and also the continued operation, safe operation of the airplanes.
The malfunctioning voice recorder and the unpaid catering bill lead investigators to look more closely at the history of the airplane and the company that owned it, Partner Airlines. Partner operated a fleet of mostly older planes that flew to northern European destinations. The Convair that crashed into the North Sea was one of the airline's most recent acquisitions. But the plane itself was 36 years old. It had a complicated history of both ownership and modification. The biggest change was to the plane's engines.
The really important modification was upgrading the engines to turbine engines.
On prop planes, the propeller moves air backwards, propelling the plane forward. Early prop planes used piston engines to turn the propeller. But turbine engines, which use a series of fans, not pistons, to compress air, generate substantially more power. Heimdall learns that in 1960, the plane's original piston engines were removed and powerful new turboprops were bolted to the wings. It's a modification that provides more power, but could pose a risk.
Well, there was a tremendous increase of horsepower installing the turbine engines. I was wondering what that was doing to the structure of the aircraft.
Heimdall has been placed in charge of analyzing the plane's engines. He wants to know if the turbine engines could have torn the aging plane apart.
I started asking the question, how can an aircraft fly itself to pieces in midair?
The plane's flight data recorder should tell investigators about the operation of the engines in the moment before the crash. The recorder from this flight is a primitive analog model.
Used a metal foil strip that rotated, and some marking pins actually scratched on the metal surface, on the piece of metal.
The antiquated data recorder proves to be another frustration for investigators. It didn't record many of the parameters it was supposed to. But more mysteriously, the needle seems to have recorded certain signals twice. The double line confounds experts who analyze the device.
We had no experience with anything like that. We contacted several experts, but none had experience with this before.
Yeah, I've never seen that before.
The flight data doesn't offer investigators any immediate revelations about the crash. Heimdall now wonders if the very fact that the recorder was malfunctioning could be a clue in itself. He decides to send the flight data recorder back to the American company that made it for further analysis. Investigators painstakingly reconstruct the partner plane. As the fuselage takes shape, the reconstructed plane provides investigators with some stunning evidence.
The only thing that would destroy the aircraft at cruising level would be an explosion. So, and some of the parts looked maybe a bit suspicious.
Suspicious for what's on them.
There were rumors that it was found explosives in the partner plane.
There are traces of a powerful military explosive. The amount is small, but the press gets wind of it. The explosive residue could be from a bomb on board the plane, or from another source. A NATO war exercise called Operation Sharp Spear was taking place that same day near the flight path of Flight 394.
One of the pilots I talked to, and he said, I guess it might have been the so-called cold rocket, test rocket, might have gone through one of the wings or the fuselage.
Many people now wonder if an errant warhead played a role in bringing down the plane. But when the explosive residue is analyzed, it's found not to have been from a bomb or a warhead. There simply isn't enough of it on the plane.
There was a small sign of explosives, but that was a very low level and looked more like a contamination than anything else.
Many battles have been fought off the Danish coast. The sea is littered with old munitions. Investigators believe the plane picked up some explosive residue while lying on the ocean floor. Explosive